Hello, friends. I'm Nikki Ruth, and welcome back to Valley of Secrets. If you made it through part 1, I just want to say this right away. Thank you for staying with these stories. I know that they are not easy to hear, and they're not easy to tell. In part 1, we walked through the early warning signs, the missed opportunities, and the heartbreaking loss of 7 young lives, all while Clifford Olson was supposed to be supervised, rebuilding his life as a husband and new father. Today, we're going to talk about what happened next, the final victims, the investigation, and the deal that still divides Canadians to this day. So let's take a breath and step back into the summer of 1981. It's July 23rd, 1981. 15-year-old Raymond King Jr. is a small-framed, sandy-haired, and full of energy. He's a kind of kid you picture on a bike with a backpack, in and out of places, always moving. That summer, the Canada Manpower Youth Employment Centre is basically his second home. He's been popping in so often that staff are starting to recognize him. Every visit is another shot at a job. He just wants to work. He wants that first real paycheck. On this particular day, the person who approaches him is Clifford Olson. Olson offers exactly what Raymond has been chasing: a job, good money, a ride to check out the site. It doesn't feel scary. It feels like a win, and Raymond gets into the car. Olson drives east along Highway 7, tracing the Fraser River. It's one of those beautiful BC drives, water on one side, trees and farmland on the other. It should have been safe. But he's not taking Raymond to a job. He's taking him toward Weaver Lake. He turns off onto rough back roads, heads into the forest, and eventually stops on a steep, narrow trail where there's no one around. Somewhere along that trail, he attacks Raymond, striking him with rocks until he's fatally injured. Then, he drags Raymond's body to the edge of the slope and pushes him down into the brush below. Raymond never comes home. He never gets that first job he was trying so hard to find. It's August 28, 1981, in Weinheim, Germany. The phone rings at the Arndt family home. On the other end are Canadian authorities and a relative calling from British Columbia. They tell them a young woman's body has been found in Canada, and they believe it might be their 18-year-old daughter, Sigrun. Sigrun is in Canada on what she should have been an adventure of a lifetime, an exchange program. She's curious, brave, and wants to see the world. She's staying with a host family in Richmond, going to school, experiencing life on the West Coast. On July 25, 1981, she sets out to hitchhike. Clifford Olson pulls over and offers her a ride, and she accepts. She's later seen with him at a pub in Coquitlam, and then she vanishes. Her body is eventually discovered in a wooded area near Richmond, only a few hundred meters from where Simon Partington's body had been found earlier. Investigators determined that she was strangled. What makes Sigrun's murder especially heartbreaking is that she wasn't from Canada. Her family trusted another country, another family, to be safe for her. Trusted that it would be a positive, life-changing year. Instead, they get that call, the one no parent should ever get, from thousands of miles away. 2 days later, Monday, July 27, 1981, Terry Lynn Carson is 15, living in Surrey. Terry had left home early on Monday morning around 8 o'clock. She was small, just over 5 feet tall, about 105 pounds. The kind of kid who still looked younger than her age. She was heading out like so many teenagers do in the summer, hopeful, focused on finding work, trying to take that first step toward independence. Somewhere along her route, Clifford Olson pulled over, and he offered her a ride. He wanted to talk to her about work. He offered her a drink, framing it like a celebration, like good news had finally come for her. It was a story that worked on Terry because it sounded normal, and it sounded harmless. Instead of heading back toward the city, Olson drove east, farther and farther out, toward the wilderness of Agassiz, BC, along the north side of the Fraser River. He turned off Rosedale in Chilliwack, an area that quickly becomes quiet, rural, and isolated. And that is where Terry's life ended. Police would later determine that she had been strangled. Olson destroyed her clothing and discarded her personal belongings, her purse, and her shoes into the Fraser River as if trying to erase her presence entirely. By late July, police were no longer guessing Clifford Olson's name. They knew him, they suspected him, and they were watching him. But here's the problem. Suspicion isn't enough. Despite everything, police still had nothing concrete tying Olson to the murders. No eyewitnesses placing him at a killing yet, as Jim Paranto did not report what he saw with Ada until sometime late August that year. No forensic evidence that could hold up in court was found, and in 1981, forensic science wasn't what it is today. So even though Olson was on mandatory supervision after his prison release, even though he should have been closely monitored, he was still moving freely through the Lower Mainland. Police had put him under surveillance, but then they pulled it. On July 29, 1981, the RCMP quietly dropped their watch. The official reason was that Olson appeared to have noticed he was being followed. Once a suspect figures that out, surveillance can actually do more harm than good. But that gap, those days without eyes on him, would prove devastating. Surveillance wouldn't resume until August 6th, after Olson returned from a trip to Alberta with Joan and their baby. And in the meantime, children were still disappearing. At this point in late July 1981, police only had formally connected 2 cases, Darren Johnsrud and Judy Kozma. Shockingly, Christine Weller's murder was still not officially linked, and the other bodies had not yet been found. Some were even still being treated as runaways. As many as 200 police officers across British Columbia were working pieces of the case. RCMP members, city police, serious crime units, patrol officers, and search teams. On paper, that sounds like an overwhelming response. But here's the part that's easy to miss if you're looking back from today. British Columbia didn't have a unified policing system. Instead, it was fragmented. You had municipal police departments in cities like Vancouver, New Westminster, and Burnaby, and you had RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police detachments, covering vast rural areas, small towns, and highways. And each of those units had its own command structure, priorities, files, and limitations. Information didn't always flow smoothly between them. So a missing child in Surrey might be handled by one detachment, a body found near Mission by another, and a witness in Squamish by a different unit entirely. And at first, no one even knew they were all looking at the same killer. There was no province-wide database the way we think of today, no instant file sharing, no centralized missing persons hub. A lot of communication still happened by phone calls, handwritten notes, and physical file transfers, which meant connections were slow to form, if they formed at all. Add that to the beliefs at the time that serial predators usually stuck to one gender and one age range. Olson didn't do that. He targeted boys and girls, children and teens, hitchhikers, job seekers, kids just riding their bike to a friend's house. That alone kept cases siloed. So even though hundreds of officers were working desperately to protect kids, the system itself wasn't built to see the full picture yet. Since Olson was on their radar, police hatched a plan that they thought might get him to talk. One officer, Constable Fred Mayle, believed Olson's greatest weakness wasn't violence, it was greed. Olson loved money. He loved attention. He loved feeling important. So police tried something risky. They arranged a quiet meeting at a White Spot restaurant on July 30th, 1981. Hidden microphones captured everything. The officers gently suggested that if someone had information about missing children, there might be compensation. Olson's eyes lit up. He talked about wanting $3,000 monthly salary. He bragged about past court testimony, and he positioned himself as someone valuable to them. And then, casually, he said he'd get back to them, stood up, and walked out of the restaurant. No one followed him. And that very same night, Olson finds what would be his final victim. It's Thursday, July 30th, 1981. 17-year-old Louise Chartrand doesn't arrive for her evening waitressing shift. That alone sends red flags. Louise was responsible, and she was close with her family. She wasn't the type to disappear or run away. Originally from Quebec, Louise had moved west with her sisters and was living in Maple Ridge with her older sister Mary. She was the youngest of 7 children. Police believe Louise hitchhiked part of the way to work after having coffee around 6:30 p.m. with some friends. She was dropped off and stopped briefly to buy cigarettes, they believe, about a 10-minute walk from the restaurant. Somewhere along that short stretch, Clifford Olson got her into his car. And what happens next is deeply unsettling. Olson drove north and even stopped at the Squamish RCMP detachment, with Louise still in the vehicle, attempting to retrieve a confiscated gun. He was turned away because the exhibits officer wasn't available. Then he continued along what locals called the Killer Highway toward Whistler. In a gravel pit north of the ski resort, Olson killed Louise, striking her repeatedly in the head with a hammer, and buried her in a shallow grave. Her co-workers checked with her family the same night that she didn't show up, and police acted quickly this time. They knew she wasn't a runaway, and by now, the fear across British Columbia was exploding. When surveillance resumed on August 6th, officers realized just how difficult Olson was to tail. He drove obsessively. He made sudden U-turns, stopped mid-road, went down alleys and reversed. And the rental cars? This part is staggering. In just 3 months, Olson drove over 20,000 kilometers, cycling through 14 different rental vehicles. At one point, he logged over 5,500 kilometers in 2 weeks. This wasn't coincidence. It was deliberate. August 12, 1981. On Vancouver Island, police were watching Olson again, this time from the air. He had picked up 2 young women hitchhiking, and when he pulled onto a logging road, officers moved in. They arrived just in time. The women were shaken, but unharmed. Olson claimed they'd only stopped so that he could relieve himself. Police arrested Olson for impaired and dangerous driving and impounded the rental car. And at first, it probably felt routine, just another search, another vehicle, another man who thought he could talk his way out of trouble. But inside that car, investigators found something small that changed everything. A little green address book. At first glance, it didn't look like much, just names, phone numbers, handwriting, ordinary things, until they started to look closer. Because this wasn't just a list of contacts. Police would later learn that the address book belonged to Judy Kozma, and that Olson had used it to contact the children in the book, calling them, frightening them, and telling some of them that they would be next. It wasn't random, it wasn't idle talk, it was intimidation and control. Psychological terror layered on top of everything else he was doing. And in that moment, the scale of what they were dealing with began to come into focus. On August 18th, 1981, Clifford Olson was officially charged with first-degree murder of Judy Kozma. And that's when everything changed. Because once Olson realized the police finally had him, he did what he always did best. He looked for leverage. He made an offer that would shock the entire country. He would tell police where 10 bodies were for $100,000. And the last one was a freebie. What a nice guy, hey? Superintendent Bruce Northrop would later say the proposal made him feel physically sick. And you can understand why. But the reality police were facing was brutal. They had very little physical evidence. They had children still missing. They had families living in absolute limbo, not knowing where their sons and daughters were, or if they'd ever be found. And Olson knew that. He knew exactly what he was holding over them. The deal became known as quote-unquote cash for bodies. $10,000 for every body or murder site he could identify, up to a total of $100,000. Olson insisted the money not be paid to him directly, but instead to his wife Joan Hale and their infant son. The deal became one of the most controversial moments in Canadian criminal justice history. Public outrage exploded when the existence of the payments became known. Many Canadians were horrified that a child killer had been paid, even indirectly, for information about his crimes. But at the time, police believed this might be the only way to bring the missing children home. So under intense security, handcuffed, escorted by armed officers, and watched from the air, Olson began leading police into the wilderness. And one by one, the truth came out. By this point, the bodies of Christine Weller, Darren Johnsrud, Raymond King Jr., and Judy Kozma had already been recovered. That meant 7 families were still waiting. First, Olson led police to Louise Chartrand, his most recent victim near Whistler. Then to Colleen Dagnall in Surrey, and then Terry Lynn Carson near Chilliwack. And after that, Olson directed police to 4 separate locations where evidence was hidden. Items only the killer could have known about. Investigators have never publicly detailed exactly what was found, but it was enough to confirm his involvement beyond any doubt. Then came Ada Court, recovered near Agassiz, Sandra or Sandy Wolfsteiner in the Chilliwack area, Simon Partington in Richmond, and finally Sigrun Arnd at a location Olson identified, which was not publicly disclosed in detail. Children were recovered, and families were finally able to bury their loved ones, and the killings stopped. When people try to understand Clifford Olson, one word comes up again and again: psychopath. And not in the casual pulp culture way we sometimes use it, but in the clinical sense. Olson fits what experts describe as an extreme psychopath. Someone driven by thrill-seeking power and control. Someone who can lie easily, charm convincingly, and feel little to no genuine guilt for the harm they cause. Dr. Russell Fleming, who was the chief psychiatrist at the Penetanguishene Mental Health Center, once tried to explain this type of personality in a newspaper interview. He never personally assessed Olson, but when asked how someone like him could appear calm, even serene, while committing such horrific acts, his explanation was chilling. He described a small group of people who are deeply antisocial, yet oddly compelling. People who can be engaging, predictable, even charismatic, while also being dangerous. People who manipulate others instinctively, without empathy, without remorse. According to Fleming, research suggests there may even be a biological component. Something fundamentally different in how their brains function. Not something caused by one traumatic event, not something easily fixed, just different. And the most disturbing part? Psychopaths don't respond emotionally to other people the way most of us do. The fear, pain, and suffering of others doesn't register the same way, if it registers at all. When you combine that emotional emptiness With Olson's fixation on children and his need for domination, it becomes easier, though no less horrifying, to understand how his behavior escalated the way it did. Over time, Olson didn't just harm. He experimented, he taunted, and he controlled. And he took obvious satisfaction in the suffering that he caused. It is believed that all 11 victims were raped, some sodomized, drugged, and given alcohol before the brutal murders even took place. In at least one attack, investigators later learned that Olson attempted to inject air into a victim's veins, a method meant to kill slowly and silently. When it didn't work because he missed the vein, he became enraged and beat the victim to death with a hammer instead. The failure wasn't a deterrent, it was an inconvenience. In another case, he drove a nail into a victim's head, not because it was necessary, not because it caused death, simply because he could. He also used vehicles as weapons. One victim was deliberately struck with a rental car, another example of Olson treating human lives as disposable, interchangeable, and beneath him. But some of his cruelty didn't stop at the moment of death. Olson contacted families after the murders, calling them, writing letters, deliberately reopening wounds. In one of the most disturbing acts attributed to him, he played a recording of a victim's final moments for their loved ones, not to confess, not to show remorse, but to relive the power of it. He was a complete monster. When you step back and look at these acts together, a pattern emerges, not chaos, not impulsivity, but intentional cruelty. A person who derived control not just from killing, but from fear, from knowing he could reach people even after death. This wasn't rage that got out of hand, it was sadism. And it's one of the reasons this case still haunts people decades later. Because Olson wasn't hiding what he was showing it, over and over, and daring the world to stop him. In January of 1982, from the 11th to the 14th, Clifford Robert Olson Jr. finally stood in a courtroom to face what he had done. 11 children, 11 lives. The trial itself was almost shockingly brief. Within just a few hours of proceedings, Olson changed his plea to guilty. There would be no drawn-out testimony, no prolonged fight over evidence. The facts were already too overwhelming. He was sentenced to 11 concurrent 25-year sentences and transferred to Kingston, a maximum security penitentiary in Ontario, Canada. Over the years, he would be shuffled through several different prisons and ending up in Quebec. At one point after his conviction, RCMP Constable Fred Mail asked Olson a simple question. What would you do if you ever got out, Cliff? Olson smiled and said, I'd take up where I left off. It shows exactly how sick Clifford Olson was. In 1984, the families of the victims took legal action. They sued Joan Hale for the full $100,000, arguing that no one connected to Olson should benefit financially from what he had done. In the end, Joan was able to keep the money, and her loyalty to Clifford collapsed. She told authorities that Olson was an alcoholic, that he had confessed the murders to her, and that he had beaten her and threatened her and held a knife to her throat. That image of the family man completely unraveled. And in 1985, Joan Hale divorced Clifford Olson. By then, there was no illusion left to protect, only the wreckage, and the knowledge that while no amount of money could undo what had happened, at least the children had been found and no more lives would be taken. Over the years, Olson made repeated attempts to regain his freedom. He applied for parole in 1997, again in 2006, and again in 2010. And each time, he was denied. Then, in 2010, Olson managed to provoke public outrage one last time. it became known that he had been receiving old age security payments while incarcerated. The backlash was immediate. Within months, the federal government moved to close that loophole, introducing new regulations to prevent certain prisoners, including Olson, from collecting those benefits. Clifford Olson never walked free again, although he tried to escape many times. He died behind prison walls on September 30th, 2011 from terminal cancer in Laval, Quebec, the same place he had spent his final years. This story is difficult to process, but it all comes back to the lives that Olson stole from this world. Their names are Christine Weller, Colleen Dagno, Darren Johnsrud, Ada Court, Sandra Wolfsteiner, Simon Partington, Judy Cosma, Raymond King Jr., Terry Lynn Carson, Louise Chartrand, Sigrun Arnd. They mattered, they are remembered, and they deserve to be spoken about every time the story is told. Thank you all for holding space for them. As the holidays are quickly approaching, take time with your loved ones, hold them close, and tell them how much you love them. I will be taking a break next week to be with mine, but new episodes will return on January 5th. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and New Year to you all. Take care.